Today we're going to divide radicals. Okay, let's get started. We have radical 6 divided by radical 3. When you divide radical 6 divided by radical 3, you want to do something called rationalize the denominator. And what that means is that whatever the radical is in your denominator, you're going to multiply it on the bottom and on your top, in the numerator and the denominator. Okay? Now, if you've not watched the video on multiplying radicals, please watch that video, and that way you'll know, explain how to multiply, because right now the only thing we need to do is multiply across. So radical 6 times radical 3 is radical 18. Radical 3 times radical 3 is radical 9. And when we rationalize a denominator, what that does, that creates a perfect square in your denominator. Okay? And so therefore we can say, we know that radical 9 is 3, and we can also simplify radical 18 to 3 radical 2. Now, if you don't understand how I went from this point to this point, let's just do that process right now. I had 18, radical 18, so I'm going to make a factor tree for 18, 6 and 3, 2 and 3. So my prime factorization is 2 times 3 times 3. 3 times 3 is 9. We said 9 is a perfect square. So radical 9 is 3, giving you a 2. So this is how you got that. Okay? So radical 6 divided by radical 3 is 3 radical 3 divided by 3. Now, if you notice, you have a 3 in your numerator and a 3 in the denominator. So what we can do, we know we can treat this just like a regular fraction. If that radical 2 is not there, that will be 3 over 3, which equals 1. So 3 goes into 3 one time, 3 goes into 3 one time, so therefore the final answer is going to be radical 2. And that is your final answer. Okay? Let's do another one. Okay? I have radical 2 divided by radical 6. Again, I'm going to rationalize my denominator. I'm going to multiply the numerator and the denominator by 6. Now, by multiplying by radical 6 over radical 6, this equals 1. Any number over itself will give you 1. So we're just taking this and multiplying it by 1. So we're really not changing this. Okay? So I'm going to multiply 2 times 6, which is radical 12, over radical 6 times radical 6 is radical 36. There's that perfect square again. Okay? So radical 36 is a perfect square, and that's going to give you 9. And radical 12 is going to be, 2 radical 3. Now 2 radical 3 can be simplified. If that radical 3 was not there, we would have 2/6. Well, what factor will go into both 2 and 6? 2. 2 will go into 2 one time, and 2 will go into 6 3 times. So therefore, our final answer is going to be radical 3 over 3. There's your final answer. And again, if you don't know how I went from this step to this step, please watch the video on simplifying radicals, okay? Alright, let's do another one. Let's try radical 5 divided by radical 8. Okay? Again, I'm going to rationalize my denominator by multiplying the numerator and the denominator by 8. 5 times 8 is 40. And 8 times 8 is 64. There, I've created another perfect square. Square root of 64 is 8. And the square root of 40 is 2 radical 10. Let's simplify the 2 8s. 2 will go into 2 one time. 2 will go into 8 4 times. So our final answer is going to be 10 over 4. Okay, I'd like to give you one and ask and have you solve it, please. If you'll please solve this one. Radical 5 over radical 4. Well, in this problem, if you notice, we already have a perfect square in your denominator. So therefore, we can just write radical 5 over radical 4 is 2. And we don't have to rationalize the denominator because we had a perfect square in our denominator. So our final answer is radical 5 over 2. Okay, here's another one. Radical 3 over radical 7. If you'll please solve that one, please. Alright, this time I'm going to have to rationalize my denominator by multiplying the numerator and the denominator by radical 7. So radical 3 times radical 7 is radical 21, and radical 7 times radical 7 is radical 49. I've created that perfect square again, so therefore radical 49 is 7. Radical 21, let's see if I can break 21 down. 21 is only going to break down to 7 and 3. Both of those are prime numbers, so I can't break this down anymore. So here's my final answer. Radical 21 over 7. Well, what if I had radical 3 over 2 radical 5? If you'll notice, I have a radical in my denominator. I don't want to have that radical in my denominator. So I need to rationalize my denominator. So I'm going to rationalize my denominator by multiplying both the numerator and the denominator by radical 5. Okay? So, in my numerator, I'm going to multiply 3 times 5, which is radical 15. Radical 3 times radical 5 is radical 15. And I'm going to multiply 2. Remember we said there was a 1 right here. 2 times 1 is 2. And radical 5 times radical 5 is radical 25. Now, I've created this perfect square right here. So, in my denominator, I'm going to bring my 2 over. And radical 25 is really 5. So I'm going to end up multiplying these two. 15 is already simplified, so that's going to remain 15. So my final answer is going to be radical 15 over 10. Okay, I'd like for you to work one like this. Radical 8 over 5 radical 10. Okay, if you'll please freeze the video and solve that for me, please. Alright, so we have a radical in our denominator, and we want to get rid of this radical in our denominator. You can't have a radical. So we're going to rationalize our denominator, and we're going to multiply the numerator and the denominator by radical 10. So I'm going to multiply radical 8 times radical 10, which is radical 80. And I'm going to bring my 5 over. And radical 10 times radical 10 is radical 100. So now I'm going to bring my 5 over again. And radical 100 is really 10. But radical 80, I need to simplify radical 80. So I'm going to have to make a factor tree for 80. So let's see. Let me put it right here, 80. So I have 4 and 20. Have 2 and 2. 20 is going to break down to 5 and 4. And 4 is going to break down to 2 and 2. So underneath my radical, I'm going to have 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 5. Here's a perfect square. Here's a perfect square. Square root of 4 is 2. Square root of this 4 is 2. They both go on the outside, and bring your 5 down. So that's going to be 4 radical 5. So now in my numerator, instead of me writing radical 80, I can write 4 radical 5. Well, let's simplify this. I have 4 radical 5 over 5 times 10 is 50. I can simplify this, the 4/50ths. I can simplify the 4/50ths by dividing by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 50 divided by 2 is 25. So my final answer is going to be 2 radical 5 over 25. Alright, that's it for today.